Good evening and welcome to the Greg Tompsett Sports Show. You are joining us here on this fine Friday evening with some lovely gentlemen here along with me and another guest coming soon. And tonight we are going to be doing the What If Draft, all the different pivotal moments and instances and flashpoints in the history of football that we think are interesting to talk about, of what could have happened and what could have been. And to have that discussion, I needed to bring in some very sharp people who could have this kind of discussion. And for that purpose, I couldn't get those guys. So instead, I brought in Arif Hasan of Pro Football Network, Bruce Nolan of the Bruce Exclusive on the Buffalo Rumblings Network, and soon joining us, Mr. Arif Arteaga. Arif, how we doing, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Not too bad. It's a fun Friday night. I've got Victor Wembanyama's debut ready to happen on my screen here. I'm excited to talk about something I've actually had in my mind for quite a while. Like, this show was one of the first shows I thought of when it kind of branched off outside of just my Bills analysis show with Aaron. So this is one that I've had in the back of my mind for a long time. So I'm kind of excited about that. Bruce, how's your Friday night?
Well, I'm happy to be your silver medal. I think that's the main category that we should be talking about here, is that I am happy to be your silver medal. Being the runner-up still counts. I get on the podium, you know. You've heard the Jerry Seinfeld bit about silver medals, Greg?
I don't not that's ringing off the top of my head.
He says, I think I'd rather come in last than get the silver. He says, because if you win the gold, you're obviously excited. You know, with bronze, you think, well, at least I won something. But you know, with silver, it's like, congratulations, you almost won. Out of all the losers, you came in first of that group. Nobody lost ahead of you. And so that's kind of how I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling a little silver medal-y, and I'm trying to decide how I'm really gonna move about this moving forward. I'm trying to inject some bitterness maybe into my draft picks moving forward.
I respect fully. That I respect fully. So Alf let us know he's on his way. He's going to be joining us here in a moment. So before we jump in and be able to start the draft, we'll talk a little bit about what this was. And we actually had a fair amount of fun just kind of going back and forth of like, okay, what is this? What actually are we doing here? At first, Arf proposed that maybe we draft a team of, like, what if this guy stayed healthy and had it, which actually wasn't a bad idea. I hesitated for a moment, like, well, that's not what I thought of, but that's pretty good. We talked about other sports. We said, well, let's kind of keep it focused on football. And then we tried to leave it relatively open of just things that we thought would be interesting discussion points, things that would, you know, kind of charge people up and be able to go through. I'm going to warn, you know, Bills fans, you know, that there were no rules about what teams were brought up here, what instances you were allowed.
Right, there's some what ifs
from
in Bills history. I can't.
No singular moments that people, you know, think back to on a random Tuesday night in July for no reason, of like, oh God, I can't believe it. No, none of those.
Oh, yeah. All right.
Yeah. Which, you know, and I know, you know, fan is a relative term, but, you know, I know you spend a lot of time covering the Minnesota Vikings and a lot of time around those fans who certainly have several of those moments themselves in their history as well.
Yeah, a couple here or there.
You know, heck, even a couple to go the other direction. You know, I'm sure the Saints are asking about the Minnesota Miracle, and what if you know, Marcus Williams doesn't completely whiff on that tackle of Stephon Diggs?
Yeah. I mean, what if Case Keenum was a good quarterback? I don't think any of that happens if that.
Yeah. So, you know, a few fun things there. So as we're going to go through, we'll kind of explain it. And I see Alf popped in for a moment. Hopefully he's back here in a second. I do want to give a quick shout out. Our guy, Chris Janke, for anybody who doesn't follow him, awesome follow on Twitter, sent me a fantastic draft board of his own of suggestions that I did use as part of my research there. So huge shout out to Chris. He came up with 25 different suggestions. So some really, really, really good ones. So I'll rattle off some of those in the honorable mention as we get going later on. But we're going to go through in a fantasy football draft style. I'll keep a draft board as we go through and show each of the selections and each of the picks of of what's there, and then try to work our way through, presenting what the what if draft selection is, a little bit about why we selected it, and where what the butterfly effect moment would lead to, why we picked it and think it's interesting, to be able to go through and then open it up a little bit to the room to be able to talk about, oh, that's a terrible idea, I can't believe you selected that, or just a little peanut gallery reaction to everything there. And our final drafter has joined us. Alf, how we doing, sir?
Doing great. I picked the worst time to run in, like 10 minutes before a show, and find out my battery's dead. My mic cable is essentially done, and I got to get a new one, and I had to find one in the closet somewhere, and essentially just build a brand new setup from a laptop and a USB mic.
Well, I gotta say, you sound pretty good for scrambling at the last minute to rebuild a studio. You came off pretty well. It actually sounds pretty good. So kudos to you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Well, and for anyone who hasn't checked it out, Alf is a great follow on Twitter. One of the most fun guys. Myself, Drew Gear, lots of other folks in Bill's Twitter like to go back and forth with. Obviously, a rabid Fins analyst himself. At the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast, the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and I gotta say, fantastic naming. Only Fins is so funny. It's so well done. Only Fins is really really good. Kudos. That is really well done.
Yeah, that's our Discord arm, which we started a year ago. We got 2,000 members, so
nice.
So it's doing pretty well, and it should pick up during this season. It's an alternative to Twitter. Let's just say that. So we're competing with Elon Musk.
I like it. I like it. And same, we obviously offer people to join our Slack channel for Cover One in the same way. So certainly appreciate the efforts there and everything that goes into it. But without further ado, let's jump right in. We were just explaining to the folks listening what we're going into tonight. Obviously, all of us have done our prep for it. And we decided that tonight would have a alphabetical order in the draft order. So our man, Alf, is going to lead us off. I'm going to open it up here. Alf, you're on the board. You can lead us off with your first draft selection. What is your first what if that speaks to you that could have changed the course of history?
Okay, I tried to find some what ifs that had nothing to do with the Miami Dolphins. It was pretty hard. I ended up with like 12 on my board, and like 10 of them have something to do with the Miami Dolphins. This first one,
I respect it.
This first one, I had 2 that I was mulling it over. Okay, last night I was mulling it over between 2. I'm not gonna tell you what my second one is because I'm gonna reserve that one for the second round.
Right.
I'm gonna hope it makes it to me. But I decided on this one, okay? And I signed it to a 5-year deal. Big deal, okay? First overall pick. It's the 1983 NFL draft. And I'll explain to you what happened on that draft. Marvin Demoff explains it in the documentary Elway to Marino. There's one thing in particular that happened in that draft, which was the insanity of their owner, Irsay, and the lucidness of Ernie Accorsi, who was trying to make a good deal. He couldn't get a good deal for the first overall pick until Marvin Demoff engineered a trade that would have sent the first overall pick to the Dallas Cowboys. And had he done that, John Elway would have gone into the NFC for a 10-year stretch to start his career against an absolutely stacked NFC that had the Washington Redskins at the time, the New York Giants, the San Francisco 49ers, the Chicago Bears. Who's to say that his career goes a little bit differently? Ernie Accorsi also goes on to say that had he done that deal, he would have used pick 23 on Dan Marino because he had him number 2 on his board.
And Marino would have been available. Yeah.
Which means that the entire course of Denver Broncos history, the entire course of Miami Dolphins history, the entire course of Dallas Cowboys history, and the entire course of Baltimore Colts history, and then later Indianapolis Colts history, would have changed. And not only would it have changed, but think about this. Dan Marino's career would have stretched into Peyton Manning's availability. So the Colts might have been even better than they could have been at that time, and they would not have been drafting first overall, and it would have changed a fifth franchise, and there would not have been no Peyton Manning in Indianapolis. There would have been an aging Dan Marino in Indianapolis, and who knows, maybe there would have been Peyton Manning in Miami, because maybe Miami would have been terrible at that time. So we're talking about one draft, one decision, one crazy owner that put the kibosh on the only legitimate trade offer that they received. If you remember what happened, and if you watched the documentary, they ended up trading him to the Broncos for Chris Hinton and 2 first-round picks, which was a worse deal than what
only 2 first-round picks. That's
what the Cowboys had offered.
insane.
The Cowboys had offered 3 first-round picks, Randy White, and I believe 2 other players. So they offered
Randy
a little bit better.
Yes. Goodness.
Crazy.
So if their owner wasn't crazy, and they take the best deal that was on the table, it would have changed the fortunes of the NFL for the next 40 years.
That's
Awesome.
amazing.
Awesome start.
So I did have something involving the 83 draft on my board, and so just to add to kind of the weird ripple effect that this would have had, so like you mentioned, right, the Colts would not have Jim Harbaugh at quarterback, so they would not have been able to draft Peyton Manning. So they might have ended up with or we might have ended up in a situation where the 2004 draft and the 2001 drafts are different, right? So Michael Vick goes somewhere else, right? Or he could end up becoming a Colt right after Dan Marino retires, right? You could have Peyton Manning become a San Diego Charger, right? Because they were going to be picking second. Maybe they pick first in this scenario. That means that Drew Brees probably becomes a Cleveland Brown, right? And then Eli Manning and Phillip Rivers end up somewhere else in 2004, right?
Yes.
And the Broncos might have ended up drafting Todd Blackledge, right? Like that's like there's just
and here's a better one. They trade for Elway. Who's to say they don't fire Tom Landry? Jimmy Johnson never becomes the Cowboys head coach.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. Exactly. Which means, of course, that the ripple effect that affects the Minnesota Vikings, might be that they never sign Herschel Walker coming out of the USFL, or they never need to trade Herschel Walker, right? Like, so there's a whole, because that's a Jimmy Johnson, so that there's a whole, ripple effect out of there. I'm going to go with one, everyone's favorite what if, I think, is Bo Jackson. I'm going to go a slightly different track. It's not that Bo Jackson doesn't get injured. If we can avoid the what if they didn't get injured, I kind of want to see if there's other ways to game it. And in this case, it's that the Buccaneers honor Bo Jackson's wish to not draft him. They draft him, or the Atlanta Falcons at number 2 end up drafting him, or whoever, right?
Yeah.
And Bo Jackson ends up having a football-only career, right? Because he goes to baseball as a result.
Almost as
sitting
a taunt that people didn't believe would happen.
Yeah, so he has a football-only career. He starts basically every game for, I don't know if it's the Falcons or somebody else, right? And here's the thing. So Bo Jackson was splitting carries to the Hall of Famer, right? Marcus Allen. In the games that he actually played, he still averaged 82.5 yards from scrimmage per game, splitting carries with a Hall of Famer. So that's about 1,300 yards a season. That's on 14.5 touches per game. He's getting 83 yards, right? So at 20 touches a game, right? Which is a modern running back workload. But but at 20 touches a game, let's say he still doesn't get a ton. That's about 1,800 yards from scrimmage per season. And you can raise him up to 25, right? That's just what running backs were like, back then. And the butterfly effect of all of these circumstances, of course, is that he probably doesn't get injured in the same way if he gets injured at all. He's not splitting his time between multiple sports, which I imagine might contribute to the development of stabilizing muscles or whatever that impact the types of injuries that you receive. So I think all of that happens if we game it out so that he gets drafted at number 2 to the Falcons. The Falcons are never bad enough to draft Deion Sanders, right? Yeah. It's another multi-sport athlete impacted by the whole thing, right? They end up in a situation where, and they could have used a running back, right? So it would have been totally different. But they end up in a situation where they might be able to compete just on the strength of Bo Jackson alone. Marcus Allen probably, never works the thing out with Al Davis, and so the Raiders just don't have marquee players for a long time. So that would have been fun. Having a Bo Jackson getting 1,800 to 2,000 yards from scrimmage every season for like the next 10 seasons, I think would have altered NFL history in a pretty substantial way.
I love that one. And obviously had versions of a Bo selection on my board. So I really like that approach. And I was going the same way. And that, you had Houston was picking there. Indy was right afterwards. I was curious, is there someone else in the moment? If you had have just had a different element, I don't know. I think the Tampa ownership didn't like the way Elway kind of manipulated the top there and didn't want to be forced to trade him because he was such a special, generational talent. So if they had if somebody else had traded up, how many different scenarios are there? So the Atlanta one's super interesting, the domino effect of even impacting Dion. I like that one. Bruce, where do you take us next with our what if draft?
I wanted to pick the thing that I believed would have the most significant impact to the game of football as we know it. And so obviously I picked what if Scott Norwood made the kick. No, I'm just kidding. That's not what I did. But I was serious in the sense that I wanted to find the biggest possible impact, the most significant ripple effect possible. And I was really, really hoping when I found out I was pick number 3, I said, I swear, if Alf or Arif take this from me, what if Joe Namath didn't sign with the AFL? Because he didn't have to. He was drafted by the NFL and the AFL.
Right. Yeah.
And the reason why this matters is because the first 2 NFL AFL championship games were extremely lopsided. At this time, there was a significant amount of bad blood between the NFL and the AFL, and the NFL absolutely obliterated the AFL in the first and second championship games, 35-10, 33-14.
Oh, I'm familiar. Yeah, no, I know.
It was brutal, right? There was a question as to whether or not this was even going to continue because the dominance was so significant. If Joe Namath doesn't sign with the AFL and then help the New York Jets win.
Are you saying, is there a merger in a situation where Joe Namath?
I'm saying I don't know if there's a merger. I'm saying I don't know if the league even exists the way it exists today if Joe Namath and the upstart New York Jets don't pull off arguably one of the greatest upsets in the history of football and beat the Baltimore Colts in the 3rd NFL AFL championship game. I don't think half the league even exists if that's the case. Not only that, it wasn't just the fact that they won. It was the guarantee. It was the style points. It was the pulling people in. The AFL ended up winning the next one, and then all of a sudden now there's AFCs and NFCs. But I don't even know if the merger occurs because it was a completely one-sided, 100% lopsided for the first 2 years. And if it goes on for another year, they might just call the thing off. I mean, they might just mercy rule this thing and go, you know what? The NFL is just beating the tar out of the AFL. It's clearly like NFL in college. We're not even going to do this.
So
win. Go ahead.
So this one's pretty interesting. I will say that they agreed to a merger before they did Super Bowl IV, right? Before the Chiefs beat the Vikings in Super Bowl IV. So it is important to point out that it wasn't necessarily just the fact that they were competitive in Super Bowl III was extraordinarily, but there's no question about that, right? I think probably you end up delaying the merger, but here's the thing that matters more. I think you get free agency sooner, right? Because the whole deal here, part of the merger is that it reduces the ability of players to assert their willing, because the reason the AFL is signing all these guys is because they get better salaries. Same thing with the USFL, right? And so I think the ability to kind of assert your bargaining power as a player comes because of this alternate league. If this alternate league doesn't have as much of a pull, right? If some of these big players like Joe Namath never sign over with the AFL, Bobby Bell never sign over with the AFL, then you end up in a situation where the NFL, just by its dominance as the sport, right, suppress players' salaries to the point where the AFL has to increase salaries even more to get people over. And I think that might get you to free agency just a little bit sooner, right? Because, I mean, Joe Namath was offered tons of money, relatively speaking, for football players. He's the first overall pick from Alabama. He was the greatest quarterback in college, right?
You're talking For anyone who's not familiar with the teams that are impacted here, you're talking the entire AFC East. So the Patriots, the Bills, the Jets, the Dolphins, the entire AFC West, the Chiefs, the Broncos, the Chargers, the Raiders, plus the Bengals, plus the Oilers, all impacted in that if that merger doesn't come through, all those, now thought of as original historic franchises, maybe that doesn't come to fruition.
Yeah, most of the AFC, which interestingly, the exception of like the Colts, right? Come from. I think there's like a couple of other teams migrated over from the NFL to the AFC, but like come from that. So that is super fascinating.
So that's what I wanted to do because I thought it had the most wide-ranging impact, and it went the farthest back.
That one.
So I wanted. I mean, initially I was going to go like something crazy, like, okay, what if football's not invented? Like, I was like, no, that's a little bit off the beaten path.
What if the Cat Bulldogs had to work a different shift that day?
I did think about going even further back. I do have one, which I don't think I'm even going to draft. It's kind of silly. But if we go to the honorable mentions, I'll bring it up. That goes even further back than this one.
I like it.
All right, Greg, you're up.
Okay. Off to a fantastic start. I really, really like it. I'm going to go a little more micro. I'm going to go, what if the city of Cleveland simply builds Art Modell a stadium? Like, what if they simply build him the stadium? Now he gets that agreement. Does that mean there's more stability at the time and that you're talking about keeping Bill Belichick and his staff together? Are you now talking about who should have been the, mastermind leader of his own franchise, Ozzie Newsome? Is he staying as the GM and is stepping into that role? Is his first draft as GM of the Browns, Jonathan Ogden and Ray Lewis? Are you talking about that style of football that we saw in Baltimore as, guys like Jamal Lewis, guys like, Ray Lewis and all those linebackers that would have been just beloved in that style of football there in Cleveland? Not having, obviously the 30 for 30 does an awesome job talking about that. Just no one took him seriously, that, well, you can't possibly take the Browns out of Cleveland. We'll worry about you later. If they just took him a little bit more seriously and built the man a stadium or helped him build a stadium there, all of those different combinations where things can lead to for Belichick, the guys on his staff, does that ripple effect change? And what ended up happening in Baltimore and how that would have been received in Cleveland, I think could have been a significant impact in where we see the NFL go.
I like that one a lot.
And I would agree. It also changes the trajectory of another pro sports franchise, the Cleveland Indians, because they used the pretty much the same threats to get Jacob Field built. And if that doesn't happen,
sold out all those stadiums, that's where they got their money from to do all those things. Do they move somewhere else?
I think they move absolutely, because they had a decrepit stadium where they used to play. So yeah, absolutely.
It would also mean that Baltimore gets one of the expansion franchises instead of Carolina, Jacksonville, or Houston, which that would be fascinating. So I wrote down, so obviously I can't draft it now, but if the Browns/Ravens never fired Bill Belichick, I think technically they were the Baltimore football team when they fired Bill Belichick. It was technically not the Browns, as Browns fans sometimes remind me. But what I wrote down for that was that Ozzie Newsome never becomes the GM, but he was the executive vice president. So
yeah, like I know he had a role there, and
they might have still drafted like Jonathan Ogden and Ray Lewis, but they would not have drafted Terrell Suggs, Ed Reed, Marshall Yanda, Joe Flacco, etc., because he was the GM when they were drafted, and he would not have been on the staff. He probably would have taken a GM job somewhere, right? And so, you'd never get the Brian Billick Ravens. You probably still have some rings because it is Belichick after all, but it's just a different trajectory. And here's the thing that I find interesting. So because I had it as the Ravens, but in this case it'd be the Browns draft Tom Brady in 2000 instead of drafting Chris Redmond in 2000 in the third round. Yeah. So their quarterback would have been Trent Dilfer, but it wouldn't have been surprising if Trent Dilfer gets replaced by Tom Brady. I don't think any one of us here would be surprised by that. This also would prevent, so it prevents the Brian Billick Ravens. It also prevents Marvin Lewis, Rex Ryan, Jack Del Rio, and Mike Smith from developing coaching careers, at least in the way that they did, because they were all on that Brian Billick staff.
Huge one. I like it. So you hinted at one already. I'm not going to let it linger out there anymore. What if Mo Lewis doesn't light up Drew Bledsoe?
Daggone it, Greg.
You know, all the different possibilities there. There was so much talent and ability around that team. Obviously, you know, not that Bills fan would ever, you know, contest that Tom Brady was a system quarterback, but there was a period of time in my life where I may have made such statements.
He made the Pro Bowl that year. What are you talking?
Because of everything around him, everything that was there, do we see, would Bledsoe simply have been able to continue? Would he have been just too good to move on from? Would it have been enough of what they obviously saw in practice, what was there? Would it have been more of a Jimmy G situation that we saw later on where, hey, we know there's something there, but look, this guy, we just won a Super Bowl with Bledsoe. We just went through these different things. Maybe we trade Tom Brady somewhere else to a needy quarterback needy franchise in that moment. Arif, since I know this one was on everybody's board in some variety, Arif, where did you take this one?
Yeah, so I had it as, I was wondering, do I want to do it the Mo Lewis route or do I want to do it the Tuck rule route? And I gamed it out is if the Tuck rule had never been written in. So Drew Bledsoe still gets hurt. Tom Brady does not lead a comeback against the Oakland Raiders. And so he goes to the Pro Bowl that year, but like you mentioned, he was just all right. Passed for 18 touchdowns, 189 passing yards a game, ranked 12th in adjusted net yards per attempt, which is very impressive for a second-year, sixth-round quarterback. Like, don't get me wrong. That's very impressive. But Drew Bledsoe is a perennial Pro Bowler, right? No way that they trade him. No way has Tom Brady done enough. I mean, he did go like 11-3, like I'm not saying, but like everyone kind of knows the game at that point that Drew Bledsoe would have been much better for them. And I think they trade Tom Brady. And I think Tom Brady is a Buffalo Bill. You bastard. I did not feel that one coming, and I felt it in my chest.
I am taking time out of my Friday evening to be here. I could be doing something meaningful with my night.
My heart.
But instead I'm listening to blasphemy here.
I was not ready for that.
Pretty similar color scheme, right? I don't see the issue. A little bit less sober, but you know.
So you guys are saying that JP Lossman doesn't take his job?
All right. I like it. Bruce, your second pick is up on the board. Where are you going?
I wanted to change the NFL with my first pick, and now I'm going to change college football with my second pick. What if the Miami Dolphins signed off on Drew Brees?
Nick Saban. That's
the Miami Dolphins decide, you know what? I'm cool with his shoulder. I'm fine.
The Dolphins doctor says his shoulder's okay.
Nick Saban ends up being paired with a future Hall of Fame quarterback, does not go back to Alabama. Alabama does not have the dynasty that they've had in college football. Sean Payton is not the guy in New Orleans that he was. The AFC East all of a sudden becomes a very, very different scenario. Maybe Tom Brady doesn't win as many Super Bowls because he doesn't walk his way. Because he's in a
division with Drew Brees.
With Drew Brees, right? It changes everything. It changes the college football landscape forever. It changes our opinion of the player who is widely considered to be the greatest quarterback of all time. It changes fundamental pillars of the way we talk about football on two different levels in two different leagues. All it has to happen is for one guy in a white coat working for Miami to go, you know what? I think it's okay. That's it. That's all that's necessary. It's just one. There is a guy out there who knows that he could have quantum leaped this and changed the future forever if he just would have gone, it doesn't look that bad.
Yeah, it's
we can make that happen. Just a small amount of medical malpractice, and we would have made this happen.
Oh. And
I would give the floor to Alf.
Yeah, and as an expert on this particular what if, as I understand it, at the time, the doctors actually told Nick Saban, because Nick Saban has told this story many ways, and he's massaged the facts a little bit.
No. Oh, interesting. You wouldn't expect that of Nick Saban.
I wouldn't expect. Yeah, Nick Saban has never told a lie. Okay.
Yeah. Huh.
The doctors presented Nick Saban with a choice. One guy has a balky shoulder, the other guy has a balky knee. You decide. They traded a second-round pick for the 6'5", 250-pound quarterback that threw 47 touchdowns the year before. Okay? And I can assure you most people were happy with that.
Yeah, Culpepper to Moss was the most fun. Like at that age, I'm coming out of college. That was unbelievable to watch. So I was not happy.
It was all right. I don't know.
I was not happy when the Dolphins traded for Dante Culpepper.
Yeah, and I must say that
God, this prevents Troy. Oh man.
For those that say, "Oh, Drew Brees would have needed Sean Payton," I think that this one actually reaches into a couple of franchises because obviously you're hurting the New Orleans Saints here. Okay, if Drew Brees becomes a Dolphin, but you know who this elevates? Scott Linehan. Because Scott Linehan was the offensive coordinator that made Gus Frerotte somehow competent and had the Dolphins with a competent offense to go 9-7 the first year with Nick Saban. And he quickly got a job with the Rams. If Drew Brees is there, then Scott Linehan is tied with Drew Brees, and he gets a big job somewhere else down the road. So there is no Sean Payton.
That's pretty incredible. I'll also add that if Culpepper stays in Minnesota, which I don't think is likely, but whatever. If Culpepper stays in Minnesota, probably that doesn't, his knee is his knee, right? Like it's just he's not the quarterback he was. Fine, but probably you wait a year to trade Moss, or you do something else regarding Randy Moss, which means the Vikings don't draft Troy Williamson. Which the 2005 Vikings offseason is crazy. There's so many things that go wrong. That's like the Love Boat year. That's like the year that Mike Tice gets caught scalping Super Bowl tickets. Like there's just like 8 million things and like new ownership. Yeah, but like the goal here is to not draft Troy Williamson is what I'm getting at. So that is interesting. But maybe Dante Culpepper ends up a Saint. Who knows?
I like it. Arf, we're back to you. Where does this board take you?
Oh man. So the ones that I have, I just don't think people are going to draft. So I'm just not going to think about it in terms of draft value. I'm just going to pick the ones that I am moved to talk about. Bob Sanders. Bob Sanders has a healthy career. So not a ton of people are super familiar with Bob Sanders, but he is one of the greatest safeties to ever play. And he's only played 2 seasons with more than 10 games under his belt. And this is what I wrote down. So he played only 2 relatively complete seasons in the NFL. In those 2 seasons, he earned AP First Team All-Pro consideration both of those seasons and won Defensive Player of the Year one of those seasons. He was in the league at the same time as prime Ed Reed, Brian Dawkins, Troy Polamalu, Darren Sharper, and Sean Taylor. And he was still earning First Team All-Pros. In those 2 seasons, the Colts ranked 2nd and 1st in points allowed. In the 5 seasons surrounding those 2, they ranked 20th, 19th, 23rd, 7th, and 8th. He missed much of the 2006 regular season, where they ranked 23rd in points allowed, but was present for the playoffs. That team gave up 22.5 points per game during the regular season and only 17.5 points per game in the playoffs, including 2 games where they allowed fewer than 10 points. In the Super Bowl, 7 of the 17 points they allowed were from Devin Hester on special teams. He was astounding. In this scenario, I think if he plays 10 healthy seasons, Peyton wins multiple Super Bowls. Some of the Super Bowl appearances that the Colts have come at the cost of the Patriots, right? And so you end up in a scenario where, Tom Brady probably still has at least 3-4 rings. Like I'm not going to take all of them away or anything like that, especially the ones that come before 2006. But you probably end up in a scenario where you're ring counting Peyton and Tom Brady, and it's close enough for you to say, I don't know.
So proud Erie Cathedral Prep alum. I actually went to college with a guy who's probably listening right now, but that had played with him in both basketball and football there and was like acquaintances, not like friends, like good friends or anything, but knew him and played with him through that time. And because of that, we had kind of a fun side, rooting interest and watch those. And I remember during that, I think the 07 season, in that Super Bowl season, as they're going through, they kept showing the graphic because he was great in 05, missed I don't know how many in 06, 12 games in 06. And then in 07, they kept showing the graphic of like Colts record with Bob Sanders, Colts record without Bob Sanders, Colts defensive stats with Bob Sanders, Colts defensive stats without Bob Sanders. And it was crazy.
It's nuts.
How
and it's like
wide the gap was.
Yeah, and it's like, they had like I forget who it was at middle linebacker that was like so good, like Quincy, something like that. But they had like Dwight Freeney and Robert Mathis, like they knew how to rush the passer. They had some really good players, but Bob Sanders, who again in a league full of insanely hard hitting safeties.
Yeah, Gary Brackett.
Right?
Gary Brackett was there at the time.
In a league full of just incredibly hard hitting safeties, Bob Sanders might have hit harder than like Brian Dawkins and Troy Polamalu, right? Like that, he was nuts. He was so fun, which
at 5'8", 206. Yeah, 5'8", 206 of just lightning.
Yeah, he was killing people. He was such a delight to watch. Like you talk about like how individual defensive players in the modern NFL don't usually have an enormous impact, right? I mean, like look how good the Rams defense was even with Aaron Donald, but like, boy. you could tell what Bob Sanders is doing. He would go straight to the Hall of Fame easily. 10 healthy seasons.
Yeah. So shout out to Mike Malloy if he's listening. Mike was the guy who played with him there. All right, Alf, we're back to you. You've got 2 in a row. We've gone through some pretty good ones here. What do you got on your mind?
All right, my next one is going to make jury duty sound exciting. Okay. It's July 29th, 1986. And 6 random people are presented with the case, USFL versus the NFL, and they are awarding damages. In the end, the story, the $1 check, all of that stuff. It was actually $3.76.
It got trebled. Yeah.
Okay. But the USFL actually did win the case. And in winning the case, they did receive $5.5 million in attorney's fees. They got $62,000 in court costs, but they got $3.76 in damages. Because they got those damages and they were not awarded over $169 million to $321 million in damages, the league had default. If those 6 people in that jury room decide to give the full award to the USFL, this is what happens. It's 1986. They play that season. 1987, the NFL has a strike year. Ooh. All their star players are available on the open market.
Oh, my God.
The USFL picks up all these players. Then before the 1987 season, because they'll play in the fall in 1986, okay? They'll play the 1987 season in the fall, and the NFL and the USFL has to sit in a room and decide.
And they merge. And Donald Trump never becomes president.
Exactly.
So, but how about if they're in position for one of Arif's selections earlier, Bo Jackson now has leverage. If they're still ready in 1986 and the Buccaneers try to make that threat and he has Donald Trump's check hanging there to be like, well, I'll just go be the highest paid player. Why did Herschel Walker go there? Why did Jim Kelly go there? Why did Steve Young go there? All of a sudden, Bo Jackson has leverage. The Buccaneers can't make that claim with the first pick.
And if you've seen the USFL documentary on 30 for 30, Donald Trump is interviewed on that.
An incredible documentary.
And he's asked what was the end game, and he quite frankly said, no, the end game was that 4 teams would have been inserted into the NFL as a settlement. Yeah. Okay, and one of those teams would have been the New Jersey Generals.
Yep.
Dan Marino was going to be a free agent, and the guy that he was going to go for was Dan Marino to pair him with Herschel Walker. Okay, because remember back then they used to care about running backs. They don't anymore. So
probably the Houston Gamblers. I don't know who else would have come along.
Yeah, I was thinking the Houston Gamblers would have been one of the other ones.
Yeah, I believe it was the Tampa Bay Bandits, the Houston Gamblers, the New Jersey Generals, and Was it the LA Express, I believe? I think those were going to be the 4 teams that were going to merge into the NFL.
So Steve Young
Which
never
means-
becomes a 49er.
Yeah.
Of course.
And Jim Kelly never becomes a Bill?
Yes,
Possibly.
correct.
Yeah.
And there are no
stays with
Carolina, and there is no Carolina Panthers, and there is no Jacksonville Jaguars.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Because they would have brought that over. There would have been no reason that
And there would have been
no
no
reason
Houston
to expand.
Texans either. There would have
Yeah.
been no Houston Texans
Yeah,
either.
'cause
Because
you've
you would
got
have
the
had 32
wow.
teams. You would have had 32
You
teams.
had 30.
You would have had 32 teams 20 years in advance almost.
Oh, my gosh.
So, yeah, 6 people that nobody knows about but are sitting somewhere decided the fate of the National Football League.
Do you
In a
think
row.
they
Wow.
they
That's a
think
really
about
good
it?
one.
Do you think they're like, we could have stopped Donald Trump from becoming president? Do you think that that's in their brain? at
That's
all?
somewhere floating in the back of their minds. Floating.
Hey,
Well,
I wonder.
There's a flip side to that. Maybe Donald Trump is commissioner of the NFL right now.
Is Roger Goodell? Is
Yeah, right,
Roger
yeah,
Goodell?
Yeah, he's right.
Eh, or
Entirely
maybe
possible,
it,
yeah.
it goes down slightly more of a Vince McMahon path of things that it's a whole Pandora's box there.
With the first
All right.
pick in the NFL draft.
Really well done, Bruce. Really well done.
This is gonna be a
Really well done.
fabulous. This is gonna be a fabulous first round pick, the most beautiful
Best.
first round pick you've ever seen.
Everyone's talking about it.
Everybody's talking about it. It's gonna be great for 15 years.
I coached him.
All right, Elf. Really well done. Honestly, this has been really impressive
That's
so
good.
far. I am so impressed with what everyone has brought to the table here. We're halfway through. All right, Elf, start us out with the third round. What do you have next?
All right. I debated long and hard which is the one that I would stick in here for the Dolphins. You could think that my first pick overall has a lot to do with the Dolphins. It's Dan Marino, of course. Even my second one has a lot to do with it because Dan Marino might have been a New Jersey General.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm gonna say it right here. It's the 2005 NFL draft, and it's March. And draftniks like me, guys that actually got started in media covering the draft, had a certain quarterback out of Cal, number 1 overall on their board, and that was
you
Aaron
sniped
Rodgers.
me. All right.
And that was Aaron Rodgers.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, a drum beat begins sometime in March, right before the combine. And remember, at that time, nobody cared about the combine in 2005. And Mel Kiper is talking about Aaron Rodgers and the Jeff Tedford.
The Jeff Tedford quarterbacks, yeah.
Okay, we're talking about Kyle Bowler, Joey Harrington, Achilles Smith. It was a curse at the time.
They're all too robotic. You
Big
can't
discussion about how high they hold the ball.
Yeah.
And how they cock it up by their ear hole.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Then we somehow learn that Aaron Rodgers
we're
has
old,
terrible
aren't we?
mechanics. He's aloof. He's sarcastic in interviews, which we later
Well,
find out.
I mean,
That was it. A couple of those things ended up being true.
Nailed it.
A couple of those things ended up being true.
Did they say
Okay.
anything about mushrooms in his draft report?
No, they didn't say any other thing about that. But he interviews terribly, and we arrive on draft day, and now Aaron Rodgers is no longer, in the minds of most draftniks, the number 1 overall quarterback. It's Alex Smith. And the Miami Dolphins, because Alex Smith was a really, really good prospect. And the Miami Dolphins in the second round, because somehow they still cared about running backs back then, take Ronnie Brown, who was a fine running back, but he's not Aaron Rodgers. Well, 24 other teams could have used Aaron Rodgers after that. So I guess it would have changed the trajectory of many teams if that drumbeat does not start in March from one Mel Kiper.
Oh, I love it. Hey, just a random side note, since you mentioned Ronnie Brown, can you imagine nowadays 2 running backs from the same NFL backfield going in the top 3 of an NFL draft?
No.
Yeah, but Bijan Robinson and Roshan Johnson.
Yes, going
Bijan
second
Robinson
and
and
third.
Roshan Johnson going 2 and 3.
Going second and third.
Yeah.
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 And honestly, if it was 2005, they would have those two. They would have those 2 might have gone 2 and 3 in that draft.
And never forget that
Oh.
Ronnie Brown was Nick Saban's first draft pick.
Oh,
So when he complains
my
about
gosh.
not being able to take Drew Brees,
he had Aaron Rodgers in his lap.
he had
Ready
Aaron
to go.
Rodgers in his lap. So
Look at
Ready
that.
to go. I
Oh,
like it.
man.
Arif, back to you. Your 3rd round pick here. What do you got?
All right. Okay, so that obscure one that goes further back than the AFL one, I'm just going to use it here because
I like it. I like
who
it.
cares? The Carlisle Indian Industrial School does not hire Pop Warner.
Oh God.
Oh my gosh.
This is why this matters. We would not have a passing game if it weren't for Pop Warner. So football was in crisis a couple of years before this, right? Because too many people are dying playing football. It is designed as, it's basically rugby. It's designed as a way to train your Ivy League graduates for war, a thing that kind of doesn't matter because it's not like they'd be on the front lines. But there you go. It's designed as a way of toughening up men, and it is a war activity more than anything else. There is a rule against passing the ball. One year, I was like 1902, something like that. 1 year, 20 Ivy League undergraduates die playing football.
Oh my God. I didn't know that. Oh my God.
And Teddy Roosevelt, who loves football, absolutely loves football,
Makes sense.
wants it to
That checks out.
survive, brings together people from Dartmouth, Harvard, and Yale, the three big football schools, as you can imagine, right?
Powerhouses.
And powerhouses, right? and says, we need to do something to fix this. You need to come up with a rule change. Now, a lot of people say that Teddy Roosevelt suggested the forward pass. We don't know if that's true. We do know that he didn't tell them to implement the forward pass, but eventually, in a meeting a couple of weeks later, they implement the forward pass. They say the forward pass exists now. Almost no one uses it. They throw maybe 1-2 times a game, but competing against these Ivy Leaguers is the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. It is a boarding school where, and I'm just going to be honest about my opinions on this one. I don't think it's controversial 100 years later to say that they just kidnapped a bunch of indigenous kids, and in order to try and like civilize them, right? The whole assimilation thing, right?
Yeah.
It's the whole boarding school thing. And one of the ways that they try to civilize them is to get them to play American sports like football. Now, they are malnourished, right? They do not have the height or the strength or the weight to compete with these teams. So Pop Warner's like, hey, what's this rule? What's this with throwing the ball thing? We're going to do that. And so he invents the play action pass. He invents route running. He invents throwing mechanics, because as you can imagine, when you throw once or twice a game, you don't really care about how you do it. It changes the shape of the football, the way that throwing gets implemented.
The rugby ball is a little bit like more stout, stubby.
And so they're winning games against teams that outweigh them on average 30, 40 pounds, right? They're throwing the ball. So sometimes they get screwed out of games just because of racism. The ref is like, that's not a touchdown. Everyone agrees it is. There's a famous game against Princeton where they win by like a point. And remember, mind you, these games are like being won 3-0, right? Like it is just a nuts game. And after the game, after they lose by about a point to Princeton, who had like won the national championship the year before, Carlisle Indian School, right? The Princeton team walks up to the Carlisle Indian School and is like, you kicked our asses. You destroyed us. You won the game, right? Just incredible stuff. And so they take all of Pop Warner's innovations, route running, throwing mechanics, the play action pass, positions, right? Like you don't have a flanker or an end without Pop Warner. And he produces this team that has the ability to win because he takes advantage of the passing game, which also leads to one of the greatest athletes in American history, Jim Thorpe, becoming part of American athletics lore because he came through the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. Without the passing game, more people would have died. Football would have been banned.
Wow, we don't have football if not for Pop Warner.
Yeah,
I mean, he just won,
awesome.
right?
Awesome.
Do we just?
It's tough. It's a tough one to beat. I like it. I like where you took it.
We just shut
I
it
like where you
down. I mean, the point of the game is to win. What if Arif hadn't come on today? He would have still gone for 4 rounds.
To be fair, if it wasn't for Pop Warner, we wouldn't have all these terrible takes on Twitter either about football.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
it's true. Yeah.
My mental health would be better if it wasn't for Pop Warner. Okay,
That's
so we're
true.
running
Bruce,
behind on time, so I'm going to make mine really, really, really
sorry.
fast.
That's
I'm
I like
going to
it.
go ahead and make mine fast. What if Donald Trump had bought the Bills?
Yeah.
They were so
So
close.
my first pick changed pro football forever. My second pick changed a huge part of pro football and college football forever. Now I'm changing the course of the United States forever. Because if Donald Trump buys the Buffalo Bills, he's not running for president. He admitted it himself that if he would have gotten Buffalo Bills, he wouldn't have run for president. So it changes the course of the United States and the world's history. I don't know how I could pick something with a bigger impact than that. So vote for me because I changed the entire world with my 3 picks, even though I objectively lost to the guy who just picked something better than me. But that's it. That's it. We're done talking about mine because we're behind. I will cede my time to the people who are smarter and more well-spoken than me. Moving on.
I like it. It's very excellent one. I had it on my board. I like that pick. So I'm gonna go. What if the obviously unanimously centered, reserved, well thought of owner of the Indianapolis Colts, Jim Irsay, decided to hire a different 40-year-old career scout in 2012 to be their GM and simply skip straight to Chris Ballard. He and Ryan Grigson had roughly the same resume at this point. He and Ryan Grigson had similar backgrounds, being a scout, working their way up into the personnel department, both of them getting their first opportunity. Grigson's actually 3 years younger than Ballard, so it's not like he was more experienced. And in that sense, he was a former player, so probably had a little heads up there. But all of a sudden, you now have a competent GM selecting offensive linemen for one Andrew Luck. What if Andrew Luck actually had protection and wasn't battered and beleaguered into retirement, and now all of a sudden had competency at the GM position, and we now have another, as Arv's point on Peyton Manning and the Colts were earlier, all of a sudden you now have a second stretch here of someone competing in the AFC to be able to push for potential Super Bowls and what was there, and don't have what the Colts now went through with their, rerun through the mishmash of Phillip Rivers and Matt Ryan and whoever else the flavor of the months were with Nick
Jacoby
Foles
Brissett.
and everyone else, Jacoby Brissett. So that was where one of mine went was, what if Jim Irsay simply picked the other 40-year-old career scout who was ready to be a GM instead of waiting multiple years to later hire Chris Ballard. All right, I'm going to continue moving. I can't let it keep going. I actually have a couple other ones that I'll do in my rapid fire. But what if Tyler Bass didn't need one more warm-up kick? What if he didn't need one more warm-up kick and is off about 20 yards off to the side, kicking into the net when the special teams group comes together, when the call comes down that, hey, there's 13 seconds left. We just want you guys to do a pop-up kick, and that everybody gets told that in the huddle and that it's there. And, obviously there's debate on what, who said it was the thing there, but everyone has acknowledged, you see it on the replay. The guys turn around and put their arms up, confused why the ball goes out of the back of the net, or goes out of the back of the end zone. Tyler Bass didn't get the call that it was supposed to be a pop-up kick down to the 3, 4, 5 yard line to let time run off the clock, that you don't have it. You don't have 13 seconds left. You probably have 8 or 9 seconds left, or the fair catch happens at the 5 and they have to go 9, much farther. Either way, what certainly looked like a pretty good team there, the Buffalo Bills have a chance to move on and beat the
Of all
Kansas
the
City Chiefs.
kicks you could change in Buffalo Bills history, that's the one you went with?
Well, I had quite a few that we can run down here. What if it doesn't go wide right? Obviously, with what was there, and does Marv Levy retire if they win that Super Bowl? Do they even go back to multiple Super Bowls afterwards? But I had a couple of those saved for the final rundown.
Sure.
All right. We are now back. Bruce, you are back on the board for your final selection.
The Chicago Bears have had quarterback issues their entire existence.
Famous.
Right? They have been known as a franchise who simply cannot get the quarterback position right.
Yeah.
What if I told you that they were a 50-50 shot away from changing that entire narrative because they lost a 1970 coin toss with the Pittsburgh Steelers for the number 1 overall pick, in which the Steelers selected Terry Bradshaw and went off to have one of the most meaningful dynasties in NFL history? So,
okay, I did not know about the coin flip.
they lost a coin flip. In fact, the running joke after the Bears lost the coin flip was the time McCaskey said to the front office and GM, "You guys can't even win a coin flip."
Okay,
And the Steelers ended up winning the coin flip. They took the number 1 overall prospect. Everyone knew it was one of those situations where everyone knew who the number 1 pick was going to be. It was the Andrew Luck draft and so on and so forth. It was a Trevor Lawrence draft. It was like, okay, everyone's going to be, we know who it's going to be. We want the guy from Louisiana Tech. Give me Terry Bradshaw. And for a brief moment after that pick was made, the Chicago Bears were thinking, okay, we're fine. We dodged a bullet because Terry Bradshaw took a little minute to get acclimated. But 1972 happened.
2 of the worst opening seasons
just
in
horrible.
a quarterback's
Just
career.
Horrendous,
Yeah.
right? And then all of a sudden, the Steelers started winning tons and massive amounts of games, and they have a dynasty in the 70s. And the Bears were a coin flip away from changing the narrative of their franchise that has hung over them since the beginning of their entire existence. Still to this day, Jim McMahon is the guy, right? With the headband. He is the best quarterback.
Who's the guy Sid Luckman? Isn't that
Sid
the name
Luckman.
that always
Luckman.
comes up? Is it
Luckman.
nobody since Sid Luckman?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
I believe Jay Cutler is the Bears' career passing
yardage leader. Yeah. And
Wow.
That is rough.
the Bears and the Steelers both. And I think this changes the Steelers because I think the Steelers, when it comes to what are the Steelers known for, right? The Steelers are known for patience when it comes to head coaches, right? I don't know if that Steelers tradition happens if it's not for the Terry Bradshaw dynasty. I don't think the Chuck Noll situation happens the way the Chuck Noll situation happens, which means I don't think Bill Cowher happens the way that Cowher's going to happen, which means I don't think Mike Tomlin happens the way that this is a fundamental identity shift for 2 franchises. And so for me, it all comes down. The fact that it's a coin flip means I had to pick this one because it's literally a coin flip.
Oh yeah, that's perfect. I will add though, I do think the Bears probably would have benched Terry Bradshaw, and Bradshaw would have never had his career go off the
Might
ground.
not have had
Bradshaw when he came back his 3rd year was surprised to learn he was the starter.
I didn't get benched.
Yeah, that's how bad he was. Like, wait, you're still playing?
You guys are gonna let me try again?
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, okay, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, it's a very like he was like in the throes of depression and stuff like that. But like, yeah, he just like, shows up. He's like, well, I have the job. That is incredible. I'm not sure why, but okay. But yes, I think the Bears probably would have benched him. I don't think we would have ever had a Terry Bradshaw, which means, you know, the Vikings, of course, would have won a Super Bowl.
Obviously,
but so I've got 2 on my list here. I'll do the other one in the honorable mention. The other one is I think a more interesting player to game out, but this one has a bigger impact on NFL history, and it's Greg Cook, the Cincinnati Bengals, never getting an injury. His rookie, at least just his rookie year. So 1969 AFL Rookie of the Year, he led the league in yards per attempt, passer rating, net yards per attempt, adjusted yards per attempt, and adjusted net yards per attempt. He was considered the next great quarterback, more than Joe Namath, by the way. He still holds the NFL records for yards per completion, and his yards per attempt record of 9.41 wasn't beaten until Kurt Warner in 2000. His shoulder injury, which he played through his rookie year to earn all of his accolades, deteriorated his rotator cuff so severely he essentially never played again. He had 3 passing attempts 6 years later. It's like when Dan Marino shocked the world when he showed up to the scene. The fact that Greg Cook had a wonderful deep ball was essential to the nature of their offense. The Bengals, after Greg Cook got injured, had to redesign their offense from the ground up in order to accommodate the weaker-armed Ken Anderson, creating an offense designed around short passes. The offensive coordinator for that Cincinnati Bengals team around the short passing game was Bill Walsh. We might never have had the West Coast offense without the Greg Cook injury.
Wow. Really,
Probably
really
wouldn't have had
good
Joe Montana. There's a reason Joe Montana went into the 3rd round.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
he couldn't run an NFL offense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Really well done. I like that one. That's a sneaky one. All right, Alf, how do you close this out?
All right, I had many, okay, and I could have gone a million different ways, but I decided to go the legal route since I already went the legal route in the
Already
second
one
round.
one court case here.
Yeah.
So we're gonna go another legal case. What if Matt Walsh, the Patriots video assistant, was actually a Dolphins, Bills, or Jets fan? When he meets with Roger Goodell, he turns over 8 tapes.
He turns over the tapes.
From 2000 to 2002, 8 tapes that were just walkthroughs, and 1 tape that had video signals, had defensive signals from the opposing team, which happened to be the New York Jets. What if Matt Walsh was actually a Bills, Dolphins, or Jets fan, and he actually turned over everything he actually did have and didn't destroy it at Bill Belichick's behest?
Well, that last part is alleged, right?
Allegedly.
I'm just gonna go ahead and say I don't believe that they only had videotapes of 8 practices from 2000 to 2002. Okay, I think it's something that they probably did every single game, because Bill Belichick, in an interview with Roger Goodell, I actually read most of the case last night because that was one of the ones I was thinking about putting up a little earlier. So I just kept it in the back burner and I used that as my 4th round pick.
I like it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was looking through the case, and Bill Belichick actually admitted to Roger Goodell, we do this every single week. And that's why he was fined a record $500,000. If they have more evidence,
if they have all the tapes,
and Matt Walsh makes a big enough stink about it, does Bill Belichick get suspended for a year, and therefore you do not have the second half of the Patriots dynasty?
ooh,
Well, I mean, the second half is the better half, if we're being honest.
yeah, seriously.
Yeah, because it's 2007 on. So
let's be honest. That's wow. Oh,
so you
relax.
don't have
Sneaky one.
You don't have
Yeah.
3 Belichick rings. You just have those first 3, right?
Yeah.
But you don't have the next 3.
And, with a harsher punishment comes a harsher pallor, right? Like, people are not going to view those first 3 the same, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That all of a sudden tints everything in the way
Yeah.
they were approached. All right. So we'll go through. We'll give everybody just a couple rapid fire ones that they can go. Arif, we'll start with you. Just a handful that you didn't get to let off here that you considered drafting.
All right, I'll go with 3. 1, Scott Norwood doesn't miss. 2, Minnesota Vikings never trade for Herschel Walker. There's no Emmitt Smith or Darren Woodson in Dallas. That might mean that Dallas could trade Michael Irvin instead. That was the other person they were considering trading in order to get a bevy of picks. The Vikings have the picks, and of course, we all know that they would draft Emmitt Smith in that scenario, and they would win the Super Bowl,
Obviously.
naturally. The other one, my final one, is Burt Jones. He was behind Johnny Unitas for the first 2 years of his career. Jones exploded onto the scene in 1976, a year after he took control of the offense, produced some of the best race statistics we've ever seen in the history of the league. He led the league in adjusted yards per attempt. When you era adjust his production, only 2004 Peyton Manning, 1984 Dan Marino, 2011 Aaron Rodgers, and 2007 Tom Brady beat it. 5th best passing season of all time after you adjust for era. So not 89 Montana, 94 Young, 2013 Peyton Manning, anything like that. Nobody. He suffered a shoulder injury and never played the same again. Ernie Accorsi called him the best quarterback he'd ever seen and thought he could become the greatest player of all time. Bill Belichick said that Burt Jones was the best pure passer he had ever seen and almost put him on the NFL 100 team. Can you imagine a guy who'd only played
Wow.
1 year of football on the NFL 100 team because Bill Belichick really liked the cut of his jib. That's how good this dude was. And he got injured.
Really, really good. Bruce, what honorable mention do you want to throw out there?
I was really excited to use Greg Cook, and then once again, Arif came in. I guess I'll go with Diet Greg Cook. Chad Pennington. They had the same.
Hey,
they had the same injury.
Exact same injury. Yeah.
No. Okay. So I have a couple really rapid fire. What if the Texans weren't infatuated with Donta Robinson because the Bills tried to trade up in front of the Steelers to take Ben Roethlisberger, and the Texans wouldn't move down because they were obsessed with getting Donta Robinson, the cornerback. So that was great. What if the Bills took Russell Wilson instead of TJ Graham because they thought they could get Wilson in the 4th round? So they traded up and took TJ Graham instead. What if the Colts called John Elway's bluff and said, "Nah, we're not going to trade you. You can try it." Gale Sayers. What if Gale Sayers does not get hurt? Are we considering the running back position fundamentally different than we did? He was arguably the greatest open field runner of all time. I think he could have changed fundamentally the way we view the running game early on or much earlier in the NFL. What if Andy Reid goes to Arizona instead of Bruce Arians in 2013?
I had that one.
You don't end up with Brett Veach, and because you don't end up with Brett Veach, you don't end up with Patrick Mahomes getting where he was. Yeah, those are mine.
I like it.
I like that Andy Reid stays the same color, though. That works out really well.
He still gets to be big red.
Looks good in red. Looks good in red. Alf, what other ones did you have that didn't quite make the list?
Well, one NFL one that I had was, what if the Chargers just tell Eli Manning no?
Yeah.
Okay. If they say no, they because I think they were probably correct. They probably destroy his career. Drew Brees gets traded somewhere else. What happens to Phillip Rivers? What happens with the rest of that first round? So there's a pretty nice there's a pretty nice butterfly effect that breaks down past that one. The rest of them,
Rivers gets a ring. I think that's what happens.
Yeah, the rest of them are all Dolphin ones. What if they don't take Jake Long and they take Matt Ryan? Jake Long was a fabulous left tackle, but his body fell apart in 2 years. This is one of my favorites, by the way. This is 2002. The Miami Dolphins have a top 3 defense. They have the best running game in football. Trent Green is available. Dave Wanstead is asked, why aren't you going after Trent Green, who had just thrown for 4,000 yards, was a Pro Bowl quarterback? And his response was, and I have the quote right here, "What can Trent Green do that Jay Fiedler can't?"
Whoa, God, that hurts.
Okay, so that's an awful one. All right. Here's another Dolphin one. We're talking about 1995. It's the divisional round. Dan Marino drives the team inside of 35 seconds to set up a 47-yard field goal for Pete Stoyanovich in perfect weather. Completely shanks it. He makes that one. They go to the AFC Championship game against the Steelers. I think they win.
Do you?
I think they beat the Steelers that year. That was not a good Steelers team that year. With Neil O'Donnell, the Dolphins beat them that year. Yeah. Here's another one, and this one has actually Minnesota in here. 2002, the Dolphins beat the Raiders with 2 games to go. They had the number 1 overall seed in the AFC. They played Minnesota on the road. They lose a heartbreaker to Dante Culpepper and Randy Moss. The following week, they play the Patriots. They are up 24-13 with 4 minutes left. Tom Brady leads a comeback capped by a 47-yard pass interference penalty that sets up the tying field goal to send it into overtime. Dolphins lose. They lose the division. They're out of the playoffs. They went from the 1 seed to out of the playoffs inside of 2 weeks. Another one, a lot of Dolphin failure right here in my dissertation here. 1986 AFC title game. What if it does not rain that day? If it doesn't rain that day, the Dolphins don't turn it over with 4 fumbles, 2 interceptions, 6 turnovers against the Patriots. They maybe beat the Patriots if there's perfect weather. And then they play the Bears, who they had smoked earlier that season.
They win
a Super Bowl.
Their only loss that season for the
Bears. And I think there's a few more, but those are my biggest ones. Of course, I had Drew Brees and Dante Culpepper. That was on my actual draft board.
So we touched on a ton of ones that I had. Some more recent ones. What if they call the pass interference on Nicole Roby Coleman? and that it ends up being a Breeze Brady Super Bowl there, and it's Saints against the Patriots. A couple I want to give a shout out to Chris Janke again, sent me a really good list. You guys grabbed a ton of his draft board. He also had what if the Browns take Josh Allen number 1 when that was coming through there. That, I mean, that wasn't even that crazy. That was what people kind of thought was going to happen until the day of the draft. It flips to Baker Mayfield the day before. What if Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson get along? Like, what if Jerry didn't need all the credit and you just let Jimmy continue to like swindle teams and understand draft trades better than other franchises for a couple more years? What if you allowed that to go? And again, I didn't select it because I was going to close with it, but I do, as a homer here, one other that Bruce didn't reference in the draft one that sticks with me. What if we don't pick Terrell Troop and we pick like hometown boy Rob Gronkowski? It was the next pick, and we take Terrell Troop, a nose tackle with a back problem, but whatever.
Whoa. Rob Gronkowski had a back problem. You couldn't pick him. You
correct.
Had to take Terrell Troop.
We also, obviously, you can't pick a player with a back problem. God,
the Bills are cool taking tight ends with back problems. Apparently, we just did it. We just waited way too long to do it.
Yeah, we just waited a long time to finally get over it. So the one that I didn't select in the draft, but I was going to close with here was, what if Scott Norwood makes the kick? What if the Bills win that first Super Bowl? On the one side of it, does it become a dynastic run? I don't know that it does. I think the NFC was pretty stacked there, and that it was going to be tough for a couple of those. Does Marv Levy retire? Marv Levy's, up there quite a bit at that time. And I just think there's so many other things that could change having that one there.
If that happens, does Bill Belichick become the coach of the Browns?
Yeah, because that was kind of his masterpiece, and it was, and a 14-point underdog in that game. The Bills had just slaughtered the Los Angeles Raiders in the AFC Championship game, came in, high and mighty, ready to roll. Does all of those different pieces, does Marv Levy stay there? Does Belichick get his opportunity, or does he stay as Parcells' right-hand guy for that much longer? But obviously the biggest one for many of the folks listening for the show here today. So as we close out here, this was just as much fun as I was hoping it would be. You guys exceeded all expectations with what you presented here. I hope people had fun with this. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy listening to it. But really, really fun. As we kind of go around here, let the people know what you have coming up, where they can find more of your work. Alf, we'll start with you.
If you want to listen to my podcast, it's Dolphin-centric, but during draft season, we're very intensive on the draft, and pretty much you can listen to us. You don't have to be a Dolphin fan to listen to us on the draft. So we do almost 2 straight months on the draft, beginning when the season ends, right through draft day. You can find all our work anywhere you get your podcasts, and it's the number 3 yards per carry. You want to follow us on Twitter, it's the same. It's at 3 yards per carry. You can see it right there, right next to my name.
Awesome. Arif, how about you?
Yeah. So my social, like with Alf, next to my name, at Arif Hasan NFL. I'm writing both Vikings content over at Pro Football Network as well as national NFL content. I just went over a bunch of trades that had occurred in the last year and a half of the NFL, like the Bradley Chubb trade, and some like signings that operated like trade, like the Orlando Brown signing, and just kind of revisiting that, see if people who won or lost, whether or not the Kadarius Toney trade was worth it, because the Super Bowl was pretty good, but he's not really a good player. So we went over that a little bit, and then also I did some a tiny little bit of math modeling to see if it's okay to have elite tackles and poor guards, or whether you'd rather just have a completely average offensive line. So went over some modeling there over at Pro Football Network. But just look for that.
So for completely unrelated reasons from the 2023 Buffalo Bills, I might need to read that article about is it a good thing to just have a completely average offensive line and not have just a horrendous hole at one of the spots? So if completely unrelated to that, I'm going to need to read that article.
Sure, I understand.
Bruce, how about you, man?
If for some reason you've listened to this and thought, gosh, I need more of that guy, you can find me on social media at Bruce Exclusive. I'm on the tweet machine. I'm on the threads, and Instagram's mostly just food and dogs. So I guess that's probably my best content. Okay. But first off, Arif and Alf, it was wonderful to meet you guys. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you for joining us for this. Greg, thanks for having me. And I'm out.
Awesome. Thank you guys very, very much. The chat was fun. Again, shout out to Chris Janke for the research that he did. Appreciate everything from our producers, Chris Seth and Lauren Obrey. But on behalf of Alf, Arif, Bruce, you've been listening to the Greg Tompsett Sports Show, and we are